Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Wampa Radio. It is a podcast about Star Wars Unlimited TCG. This is episode 11. Not bad.
Wow. Yeah. Congrats.
Thank you. Thank you. You get all, you're grandfathered in, DoA, to all the things that we have acquired along the way.
Thank you. We obviously on this show, we dig into all the headline strategies and discussion points you want to hear about for Star Wars card gaming. Mostly Unlimited right now. We might talk about a different card game at some point, a different Star Wars card game. I doubt it, though. Not for at least another 100 episodes.
Or somehow in this one. But
yeah, maybe this one.
We're going to talk about something specifically for Star Wars Unlimited that we can't talk about for the other card games, which is how we can entice competitive players to join a circuit, because we know that that's going to be kind of a big deal for folks. And let's not pull any punches. We know that's also potentially a soft spot for fantasy. I was going to do it again. FFG. We're just going to go with FFG. But anyway, before I make that mistake again, let's go to the Wampa Cave Pull of the Week.
Smooth.
So you almost said Final Fantasy. Is that where?
Yes, every time. And you want to know what it is? It's not even just specifically Final Fantasy. It's in my mind, I go back to being in middle school and I'm playing Final Fantasy VIII Triple Triad, the card game from that.
Oh yeah, dude.
And
so good.
It was so good. It was like
it's in the MMO now.
Final Fantasy VIII, really. Like, let's be honest. Final Fantasy VIII had two cool things: Triple Triad and doing combos with Zell that I probably could still do just based on memory.
I really like the combat system in that game. Can we just go on a rabbit hole on Final Fantasy? Like where you had to like absorb the magic as items out of enemies. It was a cool combat system. Yeah. It was neat. Flake has no idea what we're talking about.
I've never played a Final Fantasy game in my life. I had it for So I had it for NES, the first one, and keep in mind I was like 7 or 8 years old. But turn-based combat when you're like that age is not enticing. There's it really wasn't my jam back then. So I just threw it in a box or whatever and never played it. And ultimately after that, I didn't have a PlayStation. I had an N64, so I never played it on there. And everything that I had afterwards, because it didn't exist for Xbox, right? It wasn't an Xbox title. It wasn't Microsoft.
Not for a while. No, they were pretty Sony exclusive until they made Crystal Chronicles with Nintendo again for GameCube. I think is the first time they cross-platformed. Or maybe was Blue Dragon Square as well? For the original Xbox?
I think Blue Dragon was. I was going to say, I think that if you were trying to avoid the Sony exclusive era, you had to play either Nintendo, like Flake said, or SNES, right? Super Nintendo also had. I got lucky. So the reason that I fell in love with Final Fantasy is I had an uncle that was in the military, and he brought me back like the good ones from Okinawa, and that's how I fell in love with the series. So. Like cool. 4, 5, and 6 all have a special place in my heart because that's where I started. But
yes. that is a great place to start. I was enamored with them back in the Super Nintendo era. Just like, I don't know, man. I was like, 8, 9 years old, and I loved turn-based stuff. So it's some people like it, but and then that just extended into other consoles. To this day, I still play turn-based single-player RPGs.
My favorite Final Fantasy of all time is still Tactics.
Tactics. That's good. I kind of put that in a different category, but we should do an RPG podcast at some point. Maybe that's what we're learning from this little chat.
That is a not me thing. Absolutely not.
Hey, to bring it back home, I have the Star Wars tabletop role-playing game on my shelves right now.
Yo.
Hey.
right here. Here's the what was it? The 30th anniversary reissue that they did.
I got one. Mine's a little bit older, I think, but
okay. Well, you've got that's like an updated version of the. Is that the D6 one?
No. This is the D20.
This is
I do have the D6 over there too, but
this is the old D6 one. Yeah. I love this one.
Hey, kids.
This was the.
I will turn this car around. Gen. I swear to God, I will turn this.
Listen, we're talking about Star Wars, all right?
I know.
The point is Star Wars, all right. The point is Star Wars.
I just realized because I've changed my office thing around, I don't have anything in the background Star Wars yet, so I'm going to grab Darth Malgus and fix that.
Look, I actually see this Rebel Flight helmet replica thing. I actually won this playing in a Star Wars card game tournament.
Hold on. You got to hold that because I got to recenter you as you're going to go way off. We're going to go way off camera. This is some on the fly right now.
I can go grab it too.
Oh no, you can point at it right now. I'm sliding you over. There it is.
There it is.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yep.
So look, I was never a role playing fan, and this is coming from I was professionally involved in Gwent, the Witcher card game, for 5 years.
Oh boy.
And never played the RPG and knew none of the characters.
Oh no.
So but I got through it. It's all good.
I never played The Witcher either, actually.
Yeah. Well, look, when you guys are all talking about, Charm3r just comes locked and loaded. When you guys are talking about Star Wars roleplay, to me, it is every day of my life is a gigantic Star Wars roleplay. If you guys are showing off the books, if I had time, I'd go change into my Han Solo costume, which I have with a replica gun, the whole 9 yards. But we do have a Wampa cave poll that Charm3r stumbled into.
We got there.
We did get there.
We got there.
And the cave poll of the week, which can be voted upon beginning basically every Sunday at Wampa Radio on Twitter. The cave poll of the week was, with the reveal of the Imperial Star Destroyer Relentless, what capital starship of the Rebels side do you most want to see in Star Wars Unlimited? Your options were Home 1, the Tantive 4, the Redemption, or the Profundity. Now, before we get to the actual digits associated, Charm3r, what was your pick on this poll?
I voted for Redemption.
That's a good one.
Yeah. I know it's a bit of a hipster pick, but I felt like that was the one that called to me the most. I felt like I knew who the winner was going to be, and I was not wrong, but I have a soft spot for the Redemption.
You know, when we were putting together the poll, I brought up Redemption because that's also my favorite Alliance capital ship. I just think, and it's not the most important ship, it's a medical frigate, right? But like, it just looks so cool, and to me, it always looked like a very appropriate giant spacecraft, because it didn't, that thing would never work in an atmosphere, right? It's got no aerodynamicness to it all. It's got this like big end, then a really thin skinny end, and then a big engine section, and I'm like, that just looks like a cool, genuine spacey spaceship. I always loved that ship when I was a kid. It just looks so cool.
I also liked it. So the reason that I voted for it is, one, it has a very unique appearance, just like you said. So I think it would stand out really well for card art. But I also just felt like, because as you said, it's the medical frigate, it has a soft spot for me in card games because I felt like it's the one you could emulate in game mechanics the easiest. Because it's centered around being the healing ship, I felt like there's a lot of cool things you could do with that in terms of like game mechanics. So
look,
that's why I voted.
The one thing about the Redemption, which you guys are praising as the space aesthetic and how it doesn't have any aerodynamics or whatever, the one thing about it that really bothered me is, imagine being some schmuck that's like at the bottom end of the front of the ship, and your commander or your commanding officer is like, hey, Putz, we need this like data whatever. Okay, sir, where is it located? It's located on deck like 42 Foxtrot, and you're looking at the schematic, and you have to go up, you got to go walk about 17 miles, and then you got to go down and get it, and then come back, and it's just, it doesn't make sense.
No.
Well, look, that's why
turbo lifts, man, turbo lifts.
Sure, the turbo lifts are great, but that's why the Borg cube or the Borg spheres were like the most efficient, because there was no part of the ship where you were furthest away from another part. Everything was like equidistant, like to a degree. And ultimately, look, I love the Redemption. The Redemption has a really cool look. The Nebulon B frigate is a really cool looking, I don't know what you call it, like a utility capital ship.
Capital ship?
Yeah.
Just a capital ship. Yeah.
I voted for the Tantive 4 because I have a soft spot for the Carillion Corvettes.
It's a classic.
They just look cool. Yeah. And if you want a cool factoid about the Carillion Corvette, it was the original design of what the Millennium Falcon was supposed to look like.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
And I believe that is that. I've read that. I hope that somebody who's listening can confirm this, but it just looks like, cool. the whole facet of the Millennium Falcon being like one of the fastest ships in the galaxy. You look at a Carillion Corvette, right? Like the Tantive 4. Look how many engines in the back of it. The whole thing is all ass. It's just all caboose. It hauls ass.
It it's kind of referential almost to George Lucas being a big fan of like hot rods and doing other movies and things around that. Like he's always liked the tuning up and racing things, and Millennium Falcon's indicative of that. But also a ship with just a ton of engines on the back that makes sense too. But maybe you can answer this question. When did we stop calling it Carillion corvettes? Because that's what I grew up with. Now people call it the blockade, like they call that class of ship a blockade runner. Which that somewhere through the Star Wars timeline, they decided to stop calling it Carillion Corvette and start calling it Blockade Runner. And I think Carillion Corvette just sounds way cooler. I mean,
alliteration.
Yeah, and obviously, like Corvette is a word from like our world, I guess. So maybe that's why they wanted to get away from it a little bit, and maybe they retconned it to not be built on Corellia, I guess. But I don't know. I always thought that was way cooler. I don't like Blockade Runner. It's so generic,
According to Wikipedia, they are officially the CR90 Corvettes, also known as Carillion Corvettes,
so they still are
Blockade Runners.
Okay.
So I'm guessing that it's probably just supposed to be a representation of like different slang for vehicles.
I guess.
So I know that it's inevitable that we're going to get this card in this card game. Mm-hmm. There's going to, please, Fantasy Flight, call it the Carillion Corvette, or call it by its actual ship model name that Charm3r just told us. Like, please call it that. Please don't call it the Blockade Runner. That's Zoomer ship lingo there.
Yeah,
call it the Carillion Corvette. Its true name.
It's like calling a Jedi lightsaber swing guy. It's like we get it. It's like calling it by what it does. It's like calling us three loudmouth guys with
no cap.
No.
It's like calling the Millennium Falcon a Kessel Runner.
True.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's the same thing. You can't do that. Yeah.
Doesn't make sense. But the redemption.
It's the YT 1300 transport.
The last one was the profundity. So let's go. I'm going to give you the numbers right now. Home 1, which was essentially the flagship at the Battle of Endor.
Mon Cal Star Cruiser, yeah.
Commanded by Admiral Akbar, Mon Calamari Star Cruiser, got 49.1% of the votes. And part of this, I'm wondering how much of the influence off this was just how much of an absolute house the Home 1 was in Star Wars CCG. It was the intimidating capital starship. Tantive 4 at 27.3%. The Redemption, 18.2%. And way behind is the Profundity at 5.5%. And for those who might not know what that ship is, it is the commanding ship, the flagship at the Battle of Scarif that was commanded by Admiral Raddus. So, the whole scene of like, patch me through to one of the blockade runners or one of the hammerhead corvettes, and then that guy, what he was, his whip.
I think a lot of people just didn't know, because like do they ever even refer to it? Well, I mean, they don't refer to Home 1 as Home 1 and Jedi, so I guess that's like a thing. But people have got a lot longer to know about Home 1 being that Mon Cal Star Cruiser, right? Where Profundity is a fairly new capital ship to the Star Wars lexicon. So I think a lot of people just didn't know. I love that space battle in that movie, by the way, but I'm a sucker for space battles anyway, so, Dude, throw a bunch of ships at me in the Star Wars universe, I'm going to be happy.
Also, that battle, I think, was the first introduction of, the ion cannon weapons, because they just, like, the Imperials had no clue when they got absolutely just smoked by ion weapons, and remember, he's like, that Star Destroyer is disabled, and, like, because they're like, I don't know, our electronics are out. We don't know what to do. I gotta double check on that. But that was.
Well, I know it was the first big fleet engagement between the Rebel Alliance and the Empire. Mm-hmm. So if there were a weapon that hadn't been used at that point, that would have been when it would have been used first, I suppose.
We're open to corrections. So if anybody's out there who wants to double check.
For me, the ion cannon thing goes back to, and obviously Rogue One predates Empire, but obviously they use ion cannons on Hoth to disable the Star Destroyers, which if they had used that technology earlier, you'd think they would have known that. But then again, Vader does talk about Captain Nita being kind of sloppy, right? No, it was Admiral Oswalt that came in. He came out of hyperspace too quickly or too close or something like that, right? I can't remember exactly why, but he should. I guess he didn't know about ion cannons either. Stupid Admiral Oswalt. He's dead though, so no worries. We'll get his card, I'm sure, at some point too.
His card in Star Wars CCG is Deploy 0 and Destiny 0. Like they gave him. They're like, yeah, you can play him for free, but he's an absolute doofus.
Well, Here's a great cave poll for next time, maybe, or for sometime in the future. Who is the most chokeable Imperial officer in Star Wars? Because a lot of them got choked. Who deserved it the most? Who's the most chokeable Imperial officer? There you go.
There's plenty of options. I mean, Krennic, Ozzel.
There's like 5 in Empire alone.
Madi.
Nita.
Yep. Oh, God, yeah. So many.
Quite a few.
Bit it.
Well, there's 4 options right there, yeah. We've hit the Twitter max, haven't we?
Yeah, that's it.
I'm sorry, the X max.
No, first of all, we're never doing that. we're just not.
Oh.
No, thank you. This is a PG show. Excuse you, sir. We're not.
Star Wars is PG, and that's where all this comes from.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll call it X if it's X-Wing at some point.
I'm in.
Okay.
I'm in. All right. So there you have it. If you want to contribute to our next Wampa Cave poll, which apparently is going to involve BDSM or something like that in the future. Well,
I didn't say anything about that.
Well,
I was just referencing the movies, man.
We're going to.
I don't think there was any amorous aims of what Vader was doing to the admirals. It looked pretty punitive to me, but that's neither here nor there.
Just picture one of the admirals being like, what? No. Just goes to his lieutenant. Hey, watch this. Hey, watch this. Vader, the report is going to be late. He's like, oh, and he just leaves. He's like, oh God, I needed that. It was better than coffee. Woo! Love it. Love this job. All right, let's get to the headlines.
Getting all hot and bothered.
Let's get to the headlines. This week in Star Wars Unlimited, we want to kick off our headlines with, we had one hell of a giveaway because, Charm3r, you had some pretty hot sauce to dish out.
Yeah, I collected some promos from GenCon and got the devs that were in attendance at GenCon to sign them and decided that instead of keeping them, we should just give them away. And then...
Cool.
I was nice and I got you some too, and I sent them in the mail. So if you haven't got them yet, they should be coming.
Thank you very much.
I'm so excited.
I am very excited.
Yours, I should let you know, yours are not signed though. I only got the giveaway one signed for, for making the fans feel special.
Watch this, DoA.
When they release the Corellian Corvette card and they name it correctly, then that'll be a card worth signing.
DoA,
there we go.
Watch this, DoA. Ready?
Yeah. Okay.
Charm3r, are yours signed?
No.
Oh, really?
Really?
That's okay.
Well, hey,
a man of integrity.
I only got the ones signed that I was going to do for the giveaways. And there's a couple of reasons for this in all actuality. One, I did want to do something special for the viewers. 2, I didn't want to make assumptions about what you guys wanted to do with your copies. So if you want to get them signed in the future, you can, but I didn't want to pre-sign them on your behalf. And I also just didn't want, they were very busy at GenCon, and I didn't want to be like, hey, can you sit down and sign 4 copies of each of these promos? You know what I mean? Yeah. So I had them do it one time, and then I thought, let's do that as the giveaway because those are the really cool ones.
That's great.
It's very kind. That is a very, that's appropriate. So thank you so much to you, Mr. Charm3r. So as the wheel spins, the animation is going. Who is the winner, DoA, of this wonderful giveaway?
It is Citizen Keen of Star Wars Unlimited Database.com, according to my notes here. So congratulations.
Yeah, that is awesome. Congratulations. Also, besides just the swoodb.com person, they are very active in the Discord as well. So if you're a listener and you haven't joined the Star Wars Unlimited community Discord, I highly encourage it. There's a lot of really cool people in there, and Citizen Keen is also very active there as well. So we appreciate it.
Good person.
Yeah, congrats. That is such a cool souvenir. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, let's be real. In terms of again, it was random. We put the names in the wheel. I recorded the wheel. There it is. But everybody deserves a shot, but just for the work that Citizen Keen does for the community, putting out swudb.com is huge. I use it as a resource. You guys use it as a resource. It's just a nice service to the community. So it's nice that he gets a little recognition here on the show. But we did get some new card singular. A
surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one.
Ultimately, again, I just want to make sure everybody knows we are recording this on August 16th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, so anything after this we're not responsible for. But let's dig into this one, because this one was actually a put to a vote. And I honestly was incredibly surprised that everybody was on the same wavelength. Everybody, for the most part, wanted to see a new base. We had options for upgrades, for characters, for ships, for events, and everybody's like, dude, show us the bases. And I think that everybody kind of had it was like this common knowledge, this like well-known secret, if you were, of the fact that bases were going to have game text. And this one is a nice little appetizer for what I'm hoping is going to be some crazy stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of neat that it's the security complex on Scarif. I'm glad we're working some Rogue One stuff in there. And it's bases. It was such an easy vote for me, and I think for all of us, because like bases are going to be such a core component of how you build your deck, that the abilities the bases give you, might have an impact on this too. And so this one, if we could just I'm assuming the card is on the screen. We can just jump into it. It's got an epic action that means a once per game action. Give a shield to a non-leader unit, and shield prevents basically any amount of one instance of damage to a unit. So you can use an action to essentially save the unit that you feel is going to be taking damage with your opponent's next action. So that is potentially a very, very strong thing. Now, interestingly enough, this base has 5 less health than the other bases, the generic ones we've seen. And I think that's an interesting trade-off too, that you have these generic bases with there's certain I'm trying to remember the technical term for it, but there's a certain color associated with each of them, right?
Aspect.
Aspect. There we go. I knew it started with A. I couldn't think of it for some reason. Aspect. So you can go for a certain aspect with a little bit more health and no ability, or it looks like you can make that trade-off, take 5 less health, have an ability. I'm really curious to see where the other abilities kind of go here. Are we going to see abilities on the one that haven't shown it yet? Do we know that's the final version of that card? Maybe Charm3r or not, but I think there's a lot to sort of unpack here.
Yeah, my understanding is everything that's getting revealed is finalized and set in stone.
Okay.
That's part of their release cadence. I know that some of the developers did interviews with other content creators while at GenCon. Xander, for example, he did a wonderful interview, and they had talked about the fact that they have a very specific cadence for all of their card reveals going forward. Like he said, I can tell you exactly what week each of the different cards are going to reveal. So they have a plan. And it's my understanding that once a card is revealed, it's for sure like set in stone. But
okay, cool.
I suspect that we're going to get one for each aspect, so that we've got a generic one. I also noticed that this one is a rare, so it's entirely possible that each aspect might have one rare. I'm guessing that's probably balanced for limited reasons, because this is a pretty powerful effect. I know it doesn't seem like it on paper, but there's a reason you're giving up 5 health for this, because there's a lot of sticky situations where, because of the back and forth nature of this game, you can really put your opponent in a bit of a pickle, right? If they are attacking in a certain way, and then you use your ability on your base to give a shield to a unit that they were getting ready to finish off, and maybe because of the sequencing of their turn, they don't have something small they can sacrifice to peel that shield off, then you've just stopped their turn. You stopped everything they wanted to do. Similarly, if you deploy a sentinel and they start to damage it, but they only have like 1 unit back, and now you give it a shield, well, now you've locked up that lane for a whole turn. There's a lot of things that just having this on the board to start the game at all times will change the way your opponent navigates turns, because they always have to ask that question, okay, what if while I'm in the middle of doing my 2 or 3 actions this turn, they magically drop a shield on something? How does that change what's going to happen? So this is, in my opinion, I think a really powerful base, and I'm not surprised it's a once per game action, the epic action, because this is a really big swing turn potentially.
I looked at this, and at first I was like, that's it? Like, that's what you're sacrificing 5 health for? And the more I thought about it, and the more that I just right now, I mean, listening to both of you discuss it, I'm a lot more sold on it. Ultimately, it's not that, like, for example, I play a lot of Hearthstone Battlegrounds. There's one leader ability in that game that is literally, the leader ability is just get more health than your opponent, like double your health. You have no other abilities, you have no other advantages, you just have 20 or 30 more health than your opponents, which is ultimately not a very strong pick, because the balances and bonuses are usually a big deal. In this case, however, I feel like the 5 health might actually factor into certain gameplay. Like if you're playing Control or longer, grindier games, the 5 extra health, people might look at it and be like, well, it's just a vanilla base. It doesn't do anything. Well, I think the 5 health actually is in itself the built-in bonus that we just didn't see when things were kind of pushed out. The 5 health that you're lacking here, I want to see what like a 20 health base looks like. I want to see what that does. I want to see the kind of punch that those bases will have. Scarif, the security bureau at Scarif, the security area in Scarif, I think is pretty cool. I think that's a great start. I think it's the perfect appetizer for what we might see. Now we know bases can have themselves epic actions, and we might see actions on bases too that are repeatable but don't really do a whole lot. For example, it might be something like a base that has 25 health that says like give an experience token to something. Are you willing to burn an entire action sequence to give something +1/+1 at the expense of 5 health? Or like these are all up in the air, but ultimately the security complex to start off I think is spot on and really good.
Yeah, one last thing that I want to highlight about this, and another reason why I think this one is particularly powerful, is the aspect that this base belongs to is vigilance, and we already know that's a bit of a controlling, grindy aspect that has a lot of access to restore. So starting at 5 less health also might not be nearly as big of a deal in this aspect because you're going to have so many ways to get your health back if you start taking shots.
That's a very good point.
Especially if it's Krennic who's coming out of the security the complex, right? And when he does, he says, "Are you blind? Deploy the garrison." That's all I want. I want a card that says "Deploy the garrison."
You know what I want so bad? I just realized right now, like we all want digital clients for the games we play because that's the era we live in now. But I want a digital client more than anything because I want voice lines when I play my cards.
Those are hard to acquire. Those
are
to get the actual That gets a little bit tricky, but yeah, that would be cool. Looking at Director Krennic's card too, I just kind of pulled that up because I was trying to refresh myself with what it does. That is a restore card. So he does kind of pair nicely with the base in that way, where you'd have a little bit less health. But if Director Krennic is at the base, he can kind of keep it sustained a little bit more in theory. So there you go, flavorful to a certain extent.
As long as the garrisons are deployed on time. That's the one thing that he needs.
Gotta deploy it.
So there you have it, friends. That is the only leak, I believe, the only spoiler that we got. No. Hold on a second.
Huh?
This just in.
There's a garrison to deploy. Wait, no, courtesy Jeff Garrison. My mistake.
Oh, I didn't even notice. I typed the name here. Are you blind? Deploy the Jeff Garrison. So ultimately, late last night, I don't know what time it was, but you guys could probably check our chat. I got an email alert for the Wampa Radio, Wampa Radio at, I think it's Wampa Radio Podcast, I think at gmail.com. I got to double check. Ultimately, every now and then we get emails. And I got one that was, it just basically, it said something along the lines of like, hey, I thought you'd get a kick out of this. And oftentimes, if I get communication like that, it's usually something Star Wars related that I've probably seen before. Lo and behold, this was something that it was like a jolt of caffeine through my system, because this was the greatest thing I think I had seen in all week. So please, DoA, describe to us this magnificent beautician of a card that was created by Jeff Garrison.
Oh, it's the long foretold Grimace, walking carpet, underworld Muppet. Is Grimace a Muppet really? But I digress. It's great. He looks glorious in the purple, much more glorious than I expected, right? So I'd call that a win. Well done, Jeff.
It's not just the purple, like whatever it is about the highlight with the eyes as well, just really jumps out at me. And you're right. So on the
nice
card,
eyebrows,
it has Underworld, but then the card type is changed to Muppet with an asterisk. And then if you look in really fine print in the bottom right, it says not actually a Muppet. And I just thought that was like a beautiful little touch as well.
I didn't see that until right now, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, okay, so that answered my question. I was like, I don't think
not
Grimace is a
actually
Muppet.
But I just
Jeff
love
knows.
that.
Jeff knows. Yeah.
Oh God, Jeff, thank you so much. We love this. We got some questions for the mailbag through the email as well. So let me tell you the exact email, because I think I sound like a doofus if I actually don't know what the precise email is. It is Wampa Radio Podcast@gmail.com. So if you want to send us some questions or some freaking hilarious alters like Grimace,
give us Ronald McSolo to go with our Grimace.
Yeah, we do that. We need that. And then we need like a Boba Fett as a hamburglar or something like that. Boba Burglar. Then it just makes it sounds like he steals tea, so I don't know.
Mayor McCheese.
Mayor McCheese. Who's the Mayor McCheese of the Star Wars universe? It's kind of Princess Leia, really. She's kind of the political authority until, we kind of get introduced to Mon Mothma, I suppose. Or is Emperor Palpatine the Mayor McCheese in a more sinister sense, in a more villainous sense, perhaps?
I gotta sort of give this one to probably Palpy for Mayor McCheese, and just all the Ewoks are just fry guys, those little walking mops with eyes or whatever they're called.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are we missing any? They don't do those.
Have to be more than that.
Oh,
no, they don't really.
The Stormtroopers, the McNuggets were characters too, weren't they?
They were. Yeah. Well, so they weren't like. I feel like the Fry Guy was kind of more of a main in the McDonald's cinematic universe, whereas the McNuggets weren't. They were kind of side characters almost, if I remember. The mains of it, the big mains.
The Nuggets. The answer to your question though is the Nuggets are clearly Ewoks. Like, there's no other way.
Yeah, they're you could make them brown Stormtroopers.
I mean, you could, but.
Yeah.
See?
I can see that. Who's Luke, though?
Oh, that's a good question. Is Luke Ronald? No. Well,
no.
Maybe.
No, Han has to be.
No, he's the rival, so he's got to be the Burger King, right?
Luke?
Yeah.
Oh, the rival to Mayor McCheese? Yeah, he could be the Burger King, I suppose. Yeah.
No, so in that case, then Wendy is Leia.
I suppose,
because she's got like the hair, which is kind of cool. She just has to bun them up.
Okay, if she is if Wendy is Leia, then that means that Dave Thomas is Obi-Wan.
Oh no, I was gonna say actually, Dave Thomas could be Obi-Wan, but I think Colonel Sanders would have to be Lando, because they both got the same like little bolo tie kind of thing going on. Yes. So. Yeah, Lando would be the Colonel Sanders of this universe. We've got the whole fast food Star Wars cinematic universe going now.
What's funny is like when you guys were talking about Final Fantasy and role-playing games, and I was just sitting riding shotgun being like, I have no idea what you're talking about. The second you talk about like this long defunct universe of fast food personalities, and I'm like, I know their social security numbers. I know I know everything about them.
You know Wendy's social security number?
Yeah, well, she won't stop calling me. I'm just telling you. You got to get when you file a restraining order, you get a lot of information about the person. So
that's a whole new fanfic cinematic universe there.
She's crazy. But that does it for the headlines, actually. I would say it's kind of a slow week coming out of GenCon and all this stuff. But thank you again to Jeff Garrison for sprucing up and doubling our news feature this week. Well done. Thank you so much. All right, on to the main topic, the meat of the Big Mac. If we're gonna keep this on the same kind of trajectory here, we want to know how FFG can entice competitive players to actually play this game. And we were talking about like a new golden age. We talked about this last week, about all the defunct games and all this new influx of games. And it's difficult because, frankly, us as people who work intimately within this industry, even we struggle sometimes to play everything that we want to. This is our job, part of our career, and it's difficult to actually get everything we want to. But ultimately, when you're trying to gauge the success of a game, a card game specifically, you need players who are going to compete at the highest level. So today's discussion is, what are those elements? How can you build a competitive structure or a competitive system that will entice those players that have a plethora of options? Who's got the first ideas? And I think what we should talk about first is, what exactly are those attractive elements?
I think, to me, if I can jump in first, the most important part of any competitive environment for a card game, in my opinion, is the local stores. Like having events are just fun, right? Because a lot of people like to talk about like, oh, what's the ROI for this game, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, 99% of players of your game are not going to be approaching it from the hardcore competitive standpoint. They're going to play locals and they're going to try to win, and they're going to maybe net deck some things and tweak things and play with friends, but they're not going to be like aiming to go to like nationals and worlds and all that. That hyper competitive side of the game is important, but the most important thing is having a large community that competes and has fun at the local level. So if that bedrock is solid, out of that will grow your hardcore competitive scene, which is obviously like all of our passion. Like we like to see games push to the nth degree of strategic, depth, right? So that's the coolest thing to me. But I think it's important that we all acknowledge that like the bedrock is the locals, right? So if that is good, then I think everything can go well from there, right?
All right. So I don't disagree at all. I think that having strong local events is incredibly important, and not even just from a competitive standpoint, but also just from a player onboarding, player retention standpoint. Totally. I think all of those are very, very relevant. That being said, I think because this is, as Flake mentioned, kind of the golden age or the new golden era, or the return of the card games, however you want to word it.
The golden arches, if you will.
Yeah, the golden arches, if you will, right? Like we all know that we're on an upswing and that there's a lot of other games that are coming to market. I think that you have to do something if you're trying to attract that competitive player base. Again, small percentage, but they do want something flashy, splashy. Usually that's prize pool. Battle Spirit Saga is a great example when they did their announcement for their big open events. So we're not even talking like their Pro Tour yet, but just like their launch event for North America was $100,000 prize pool for a game that like was just launching. They were like, day one, we're going to put up that kind of money. And I know a lot of people that were playing Flesh and Blood that, went to that event, or even others that like tried to learn the game and tested to decide if it was worth their time, that sort of thing. All because of the price tag attached. Now, I want to be very clear. I don't think that just relying on prize money is sustainable or good for a game long term. But I do think that having something that will give those hyper competitive players something that they feel like they're working toward, that carrot, if you will, is very important. Doesn't even have to be day one. But if they know, like, 3 months or 6 months after a game launches that there's going to be some Pro Tour event or some big event with a substantial prize pool, they will pick up a game and start jamming it.
To me, the most important element to this, and I want to give full credit to what DoA said, because without those grassroots lower end things, people are not necessarily going to get their first, nobody wants their first competitive experience to be like a calling, like in Flesh and Blood, like this huge 300 or 400 person tournament where basically if you lose your first game, you're out. Like nobody wants that experience. Nobody wants
very
that
intense rules enforcement too. It can be very stressful if you're a newer player.
Incredibly
in
stressful
that environment. Yeah,
that's why going to your LGS and playing like your local, your weekly FNM or your weekly Armory or whatever, like that's a great experience because it's low stakes and it's low pressure and there's a lot of leeway, especially for new players. However, what we're talking about is what is going to attract those the spikes out there, the sharks that want to actually go to these tournaments, because to them, it's not just a matter of fun. And that's an element I think that we need to be realistic about. A lot of players aren't, like, for example, a lot of people, like you mentioned, Charm3r, where some people that we know that went to Battle Spirit Saga to play in that, they didn't go to it because they were completely enamored with the game. They thought the game was all right, but they went to it because to them it was another opportunity for them to get a solid return on their investment. And that ROI of time and money to learn the game, to buy an entry ticket, they know that they're good enough at a card game that the $100 they spent on the deck plus the $50 they spent to actually get to enter the tournament plus whatever, couple $100 for travel and accommodations for that day, they know that $300 or $400 they spent is going to come back because they're winning at least $500 to $600 plus promos, etc. And that, I think, to me, is an element where Star Wars U is going to have to play ball in that regard, where prizing and prize money is going to fill seats. And every card game that comes out now that wants to develop and nurture a competitive scene, the minimum price tag has always been this like $1 million annual prize purse. Flesh and Blood did it, Magic did it, and now that's the bare minimum. Gwent did it. A lot of major card games just come out of the gate and say, year one, $1 million spread across all these tournaments, culminating in the big one. So I have to say, as kind of greasy as it may sound, if they're not putting a good ROI on this, then a lot of the competitive players are not going to peel away from the EV of playing One Piece or playing whatever else is out there right now.
Mm-hmm. I think something that's attached to that too, that I think about a lot, and obviously there's some bias there too, is the broadcasting element of it, which we're all familiar with, and that you see these companies spend put these enormous prize pools up, they spend all this money, and then you look at the broadcast and it looks like something that's being done out of like a high school gymnasium or something, like in terms of you got terrible lighting, terrible microphone quality, like kind of a joke backdrop kind of thing. If you're putting all this money into your event, make the broadcast look good too. There's lots of people out there, I would say like the three of us, that can help make sure that happens. But then there's also a certain level of investment that I think should be done, especially with an intellectual property like Star Wars too, right? Because, there's going to be stakeholders that are going to expect the quality of this at every level to be higher than your average, card game. And so I think making sure that you have a solid looking broadcast with people that are entertaining and can promote your game well and tell the stories of those players well is going to be pretty vital too, in terms of enticing people to watch first of all, but also want to engage with the game and continue to engage with it. So again, I'm biased. I'm an on-camera personality. It's what I do for a living and I love it, but I'm also very passionate about making sure that the games I like are represented appropriately, in a way that keeps people watching and having fun and coming back for more. So I think that's another aspect of it too that needs attention.
I want to piggyback off of that. I'm also biased, obviously. I think all three of us are very upfront that we love broadcasting, we love card games, but I think that I want to circle back to where DoA started this conversation, which is that bedrock of community participation. And something that he said was like, somebody might go to locals and, they want to win locals and they might net deck something, but they're not really concerned about going to nationals or whatever, right? But you still have to net deck from somewhere. And a lot of that comes from coverage, whether it's broadcast or good written format stuff as well. But there's got to be some way that information is being disseminated. If you want players to know what's good or what's trending, there's got to be a way to get that out there. And broadcasts are a great way to do it, in my opinion, just because you're not getting just a deck list of what won. You get to see the deck in action. You get to understand why it's good because you're seeing a skilled player pilot it. So there's so much more to that story. And I think that broadcasts do really help, one, the community with understanding the game, but also just help tell the story of how you want the game to be played. Obviously, all of the devs, when they pour their heart and soul into this, they have this vision for how games play out. And then being able to broadcast some of the best players in the world playing it in such a fashion, I think is also a big boon, because if somebody says like, hey, what's your game like? You can point to that and say, here's a great match, or here's something that stood out. And also, DoA was mentioning, hey, there's all this prize money going in. I agree. What is the point of like handing somebody $100,000 for a big event if nobody gets to see it or know about it? Or if when they do get to see it, it's on, a webcam from 2010 and it's grainy and there's glare and there's no respect there, right? Like if you're going to put that much love and care into your game, then there should be as much love and care into how it's presented at all times. So I'm also biased, but I do think that a lot of times people kind of undervalue or misunderstand the real value that coverage brings, because it's not just like, hey, I want to know what happened. It's all of those little things that you take for granted, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to bridge the gap a little bit here from what you led off with, DoA, which was the grassroots small tournaments, to what we arrived at, which was these $100,000, $200,000 tournaments that have this wonderful production value. And to me, the benchmark for production value is what Magic is doing right now. You know, these incredible sets, these panels, you know, a great cast of people that are doing that. I think that they really do incredible work. Flesh and Blood is kind of catching up to it, but they're still leagues behind. They do their best. But again, it's expensive to put these things on. But what I think that is, you know, kind of that has to link what you said, DoA, to where we arrived at are multiple options of various tiers. And to me, it's getting your first licks at a competitive environment at like your weekly armory or your store championship or your small little kind of, you know, your 40-person tournament or whatever that has a top 8, like that kind of mild related stress of that kind of small scale thing, to then upgrading it to something like a Battle Hardened or a GP or a Calling in Flesh and Blood or regionals even. That when the player base balloons to several hundred to, I think the biggest one I think was Pro Tour Baltimore for Flesh and Blood. The Calling there was like over 900 people. Unreal amounts. But that wasn't the big show because like that was only a $20,000 prize purse, but there were still 1,000 people competing for it. Ultimately, though, like being able to go to something like that, a one-day tournament, you know, a one-day, all-day, round 1 starts at 9. If you win the whole thing, you're home by, you know, you're out of there by 9. It's a 12-hour affair if you win the whole thing. But those also need to be taken care of, need to be advertised. They need to be propped up where it's not just about, like you said, oh, well, we just gave somebody an envelope behind the scenes and they went home and then it was never spoken about. What I like about Flesh and Blood and what Flesh and Blood is doing right now is, I don't know if it's just organically or the fact that the community has sort of taken the reins on this, but they have taken the competitors and turned them into heroes themselves. They've turned them into focal points and spotlights to promote the game, and they have shown up and said, hey, it's not just about watching the competition. You want to watch this person play this deck because it is something to behold. And I think that if Star Wars U can start propping up the emerging heroes in the game, it might entice some of those players to continue onward when they feel like they are in themselves a little bit of a celebrity within the game. Because look at somebody like Brody Spurlock from Flesh and Blood. The kid's not even 18. He's been crushing it for a year and a half now, but everybody knows who this kid is. And, you know, thankfully he's a incredible human being through and through. And Flesh and Blood digs into that. They want to hear more from these personalities who have either established themselves through content creation, but at the same vein, they put them on the same echelon. If you're winning tournaments and are a good person, we are going to put you in the spotlight and we're going to elevate you.
I think Flesh and Blood is a good example of when you have a community come in that has a lot of people in it that you know, come from a competitive card game background or an esports background and like are already in tune with the star building aspect of it and know how important that is to, you know, kind of create a mythos around the game that helps keep people engaged and give them something to aspire to be, right? And so the support for these players and the star building was so good in this game early on. And that came from the community, but it also came from Legend Story Studios as well, that did a lot of good job, I thought, having articles on their website that talked about these players, highlighting them on broadcasts from time to time. It all comes down to the community, I think, in the biggest way, but there was a lot of support all around for that. So I'd love to see that in this game too. I think, you know, there are already a bunch of people interested in the game that are also interested in star building and building that, you know, mythos and extended universe for SWU, as it will. So I'm sure that'll happen, but it would be good to get support from the company making the game as well. That goes a long way. So,
alrighty. The other little aspect here is, frankly, just the structure, and I think we dug into it a little bit already, where, you know, grassroots, small time stuff. Do you guys have an ideal structure in mind already? I mean, we've seen so many different variations and such. But like from the fact that I can go on any Wednesday night to my LGS to play in an armory, all the way to, it's ProQuest season or it's RTN season, Road to National season, and then I can go to whatever battle hardens I want to. Then the tier above that is callings. Do you have a built-in kind of structure in mind that you think would be a successful, framework?
I really like the way Flesh and Blood does it, honestly. Like you've got the locals, and then even at the big events, you've got the battle hardens and the callings you can play in, even if you're not, in the big show, so to speak. And that's been fun for me personally, because there was a time in my life where I did have the time to grind and like get to that level and compete, with the best. But that time is, over now. So I like to just go and see how far I can get in some of these other events. So I like that aspect of it too, where you still feel like you're playing in something important, but it's not obviously like the highest of heights, and that's okay for someone like me that's still competitive, but knows that I will not be like a pro in a game again, probably. So probably we'll see. You never know. Probably not.
I just want to go out on a limb and say that I like the skeleton of the structure that we've already seen from FFG. So they did that kind of deep dive on explaining how they wanted to approach the kind of casual player friendly formats. And while we haven't got our deep dive on their organized play yet, we do know that they have, some level of tournaments that are going to be, the planetary, the regionals, the sectors, and that those are going to vary in accessibility, but also weight for tournament points. I think that that's fine. When I look at that, that very much feels to me similar to what Flesh and Blood does with battle hardens, with callings, and Pro Tour events, right? These different scaled events that are still worth traveling to, but they might have a different weight in terms of what they count toward for the year. I think the real question isn't so much that structure as it is the frequency, because one of the frequent complaints I do get about Flesh and Blood is that, early in the game, there was event fatigue. That's the best way I know how to put it, right? There was a lot of players that were like, man, there's like a calling every month, and like I want to go to all of them, but I obviously can't afford to. But if I don't go to one, I feel like I'm missing out. So some of the feedback was, hey, we got to spread these out a little bit. And then this year it was like, okay, you overcorrected, because now it's okay, there's one Pro Tour and everyone's like, all right, once that's done, I just feel like I'm waiting. And then we're going to go to Worlds, but then you hit holiday season, and then I feel like I'm waiting. So I think trying to find that perfect middle ground, and it's not going to happen right away. You obviously got to feel it out. But I think that just making sure that you always have a way to keep that carrot for the competitive players so they feel engaged and feel like they're building towards something. A lot of the competitive players will play at locals to prepare for whatever the next big event is, for example. So if there is no next big event for 6 months, then they stop playing locals until, they're 2 or 3 months out. So for me, I think that the structure they've kind of outlined is good. It's just getting the right frequency and cadence.
That's an argument that early on, like right now, like you mentioned, it went from event fatigue where people were complaining that, hey, there's too many events. Like, come on, relax. Like, I can't play this game every weekend. And nobody was like forcing people to play every weekend. It was just the fact that, hey, it's there if you want it. And people were like, I can't go, even though like, sure. So and it's funny because like the response would be like, so don't, like, I don't know what else to
and with like PTIs too, that players that have that don't need to be on the grind, theoretically. If you've got your Pro Tour invite, then you can play as much or as little as you want to until Pro Tour,
Sure. And right now, I think that the criticism against Flesh and Blood structure is that there's, I think, the right amount of events. It's just there's certain regions and areas that are just getting left out. And that oftentimes is like a logistical issue. It's a cost issue of where you're doing it. Look, I live in Canada. We don't have callings. We don't have battle hardens. We don't. And it's like, it's sad because there was a time where some of the best players in the world were from here and we just never had it. So the amount of Canadians that are constantly checking costs and flights to go down south to go to the US to play in these events, but it's a costly endeavor. Usually it's a van of like 7 dudes that are driving around and oftentimes like doing really well at these tournaments. But I think that that's the right thing. Is it has to be options, and it has to be sprinkled enough around where nobody's feeling left out. Because even the person who might say, I wish I can go to them, but it's not feasible for me to get from here to Dallas, let's say, they might be able to say, well, you know what? Like, if I wait another month or two, I can go to the one in Chicago because that's within drivable distance. Like, these are options that I think Fantasy Flight needs to pack in at the same time.
And they're a bit more of I don't know what their budget situation is for this kind of thing yet, but like they are a more established company than a company like Legend Story that makes Flesh and Blood that's still a growing company, and they're still very focused on sustainability, making sure that they don't, bankrupt themselves doing all this kind of stuff, which is a smart thing to do. You definitely do not want to overspend if you're still a relatively small growing company, even if you do have a successful product. Whereas, Fantasy Flight has been around for years and released many, many, many successful products, some even in the Star Wars universe already. So you would imagine that there is a little bit more plan to go a little bit more robust with this kind of thing. Fingers crossed.
Fingers are definitely crossed. There is competition out there, though, however, within the competitive scene. That's what I mentioned at the onset of this conversation, was that we all have friends that are picking and choosing based off of what makes sense for them time-wise. And I just want to give people a little bit of a snapshot of what is out there currently. At the top echelon, there's the Magic the Gathering World Championships is a $1 million prize pool, not annually, for that one event. Now, to qualify for it, it's incredibly difficult to qualify for. However, first place is going to walk away with $100 grand. That's one thing. Next up, Flesh and Blood World Championships is going to happen in November in Barcelona. $300,000 prize pool, $100,000 to first place. Battle Spirit Saga Pro Tour that just concluded. You casted that, Charmer. $100,000 for the prize pool, 25 Gs first place. So there are certainly options out there. I couldn't get numbers for One Piece, but I did get the fact that One Piece, for talking about structure, I'm going to put the graphic up on the screen for those who are watching us on YouTube. But there is multiple paths to get to your national championships and then culminating in a world championship. So there are plenty of options that are out there. So, Star Wars Unlimited has to be aware of the fact that they need to give people a reason, not just to say, well, I can do one or the other. It's, I need to invest the time and the money to buy the game, learn the game, and then compete in the game. So they have that barrier, that additional barrier of entry in order to compete with these massive, massive prize pools that already exist.
It's so interesting because I feel like we're seeing, it is a new golden age of card games where there's just a lot out and a lot to play in. But I feel like we're seeing a new sort of era of card game pros where it's just, it almost reminds me of the FGC, where it's not enough to be pro in one game. You have to be pro, and when I say FGC, I mean fighting game community on the esports side. You need to be, pro in a bunch of different games. Because no one game is going to, probably sustain you as a living, right? So these people that are choosing to, pursue this living do have to become pros in multiple games. And so now we do have a point where there is so much to pick from, like you're saying, Flake, what do I choose? What do I put my time into? And it's going to be interesting to see how this all kind of shakes out a few years down the road. Because there's a lot of good stuff out there right now. But eventually, we are going to see some systems and some games kind of start to rise to the top and start to push out some of the other ones. But we'll see. It's interesting. Star Wars, funny enough, back when the last age like this, Star Wars was one of the IPs that did push a lot of the other games out. It was Magic, Star Wars, and
yeah,
I don't know, what would you say the third? Pokemon, probably, if we're talking about late 90s. Yeah,
Pokemon.
Early 2000s. Yep.
Yu-Gi-Oh for
Yu-Gi-Oh for sure
started to have that rise there as well,
especially for regions like Asia. Yu-Gi-Oh is huge there. Yeah.
I kind of lump it together with Star Wars, but I would also say you have to put Lord of the Rings in there because Decipher supported the Lord of the Rings and the Star Wars game very well up until the company folded due to the embezzlement scandal. So because I went to the first World Championship for Lord of the Rings and that had a massive turnout. So
There's one thing though, I think that, and again, like the Lorcana's releasing, I think in a couple days from us recording this. If you're catching this on launch day, it released yesterday. Ultimately, the one thing about Lorcana that, of all the reasons that you might like it or dislike it, one of the reasons that a lot of people are actually not actively giving it a hard look is because they came out of the box and just frankly said, "Oh, there's no competitive play. We don't have a competitive structure. We don't have an organized play system." And a lot of people were like, "What? Like, really? Like, that seems to be the baked-in necessity these days when it comes to card games." And then they kind of rolled it back. They ran it back and said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa. What we mean to say is we don't have one for 2024, or 2023 through till 2024, but we will eventually have one," which I think is them just saying like, okay, this was a massive oversight on our side, and
it's so bizarre.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Trust me. Of all the things that are bizarre about the Lorcana launch and Ravensburger, this easily gets lost within the fray.
I have no idea what the story is there, obviously. This is just wild speculation, but I wonder if there was even some sort of thing with Disney where they were like, well, we want this to be a pure for fun thing, so they encourage them not to do it, at least initially. But then, Star Wars is also owned by Disney, but I guess it's not quite as kid-friendly as something like Lorcana would be. So I'm just very curious. I have no idea, but it's a fun thing to kind of speculate on because, yeah, if you're releasing a card game in this card game era, organized play should be like one of the default checks you have to like check as you go through what you're going to be doing with this release.
Yeah, the point there, like just to sort of summarize, was the fact that there are people who just said, well, there's no competitive play, so I'm not going to give it a look. And so for some people, that is literally the line in the sand.
So I don't know any reasonings or I don't have any inside info, but I will say, I think one of the reasons that Lorcana probably wrote it off is because they didn't feel like they needed it to generate appeal for some of their like collectors and chase stuff.
That's certainly true. Yeah.
Because one of the things when I think about competitive play and I think about like Flesh and Blood, for example, Flesh and Blood obviously had prize pool stuff, but another one of the big drivers for wanting to compete in those events, especially the early ones, was that you could earn those coveted gold foils. And those were also selling for a lot of money because they were selling for a lot. And that was the way that you got them. And that's, I think, another piece of the puzzle that is important to the competitive play is that if you have these kind of coveted things you can only get through competitive play, that also is a way where you can kind of entice players without amping up the prize pool, right? Like if your prize pool is you're going to win 10 grand, but there's a card you can sell for 5 grand on the secondary market, like that's going to be a big driver. And Flesh and Blood saw that. They were almost in many ways printing money with some of those gold foils early on. I mean, they still are, but early on it was a really big driver. I don't think Lorcana needs to do that because you already have the Disney adults. So they probably just said, why if we don't have to? People are going to eat it up anyway.
That's true. Yeah.
I think that's fair. That is definitely fair.
I think it hurts me in my competitive gaming soul, but that is a good point. Yeah.
So those EA tunics or whatever the tunics, those Final Spring tunics from like the first season of competitive Flesh and Blood. If you won like a Road to Nationals in that first season, I think you were awarded, it was either a gold foil tunic or an extended art tunic. You know how much those are selling for now?
Quite a bit, I would imagine.
I think they're between 10 and 20 Gs.
I was going to say the last graded one I saw was around 20. Now, granted, that was high grade, but
nonetheless, the fact that imagine paying $20 to enter your local tournament, your little store championship tournament, winning it, getting a card, and then sitting on it for 2 years. 2 years, not like where Lotus territory is. 2 years, and you're flipping it for 20 grand. It's unreal. But this is the mentality that friends of ours look at when they go and enter tournaments. For example, for One Piece, when I started learning One Piece, I said, they were teaching me the game, and our good friend Brian Basoko said, the hardest part about One Piece is registering for a tournament because they're capped, and everybody knows that if you manage to sign up, the promo that you get at the door for walking in, you could turn around to the vendor and sell it for $200 because they're that coveted, they're that in demand, and that, and it's unreal. And they're like, everything after that is gravy. So it's basically, they said it's the toughest part. These tournaments used to sell out in under a minute. They'd get all registered, and people would set their alarms and go nuts for these things. So just to sort of wheel this back, I mean, can we summarize, I suppose, some of the dot points here before we get to the mailbag of like how to entice players? Like if each of us were to give one major little piece here, what would it be?
Strong local community.
Great prize support and structure.
Yeah, and I will say options and locations that make sense. I think that holy trinity definitely is kind of what needs to be hammered down. And then I promise you, I think the game is good enough that people will not be turned away by it. But like you said, DoA, people are right now, like these grinders are in this mindset of, okay, but like it's got to be worth my time. And that's where we're at. Well, not a bad discussion, and I think we actually kept this one within a nice little, time bubble.
Probably good, yeah.
I think the fact that we didn't get like 42 spoiler cards this week helped us out on that one, but we do have a nice little hefty mailbag to run through. So, without further ado, let's get to the bad feeling mailbag.
I got a bad feeling about this.
I have a bad feeling about this.
I've got a bad feeling about it.
Quiet.
All right, so the bad feeling mailbag. We got a bunch of questions, actually. We're going to try to get through them as fast as possible, as many as we can. If we can't, they go in the vault. We'll revisit them down the line. Who wants to go first?
I'll take the first one, sure. So Kenny Blanco, I'm assuming that it's Kenny, his Twitter handle is K Blanco, but it's at Kenny White. Blanco is Spanish for white. Anyway, they say, have you guys heard anything about sideboards or best of 3 matches in this game? Personally, I don't want sideboards, mainly because you usually have to acquire 10 to 15 more rares for your deck, but it also creates lopsided matchups when you draw the specific hate cards. So I have not heard anything personally, and the devs didn't mention anything to me when I spoke to them at GenCon, so I guess we'll have to wait and see. I would, however, like to echo what Kenny has said. I'm very anti-sideboard. Like, I'm on record as being anti-sideboard because I think that it is a crutch for game development. I think that what happened is the early sets of Magic the Gathering had some really lopsided, as Kenny mentions here, one-sided cards that really polarized matchups. And the way that Magic made up for that mistake was by adding the sideboards. But then because that was the standard for Magic, every card game since then has done it. But I don't think you have to. I'm just of the opinion that you should just design your game better. And if you're going to do sideboards, then I prefer something like Flesh and Blood, where it's a pre-sideboard so that you're not going in and out in between every game in a best of 3. Like, it should just be a one and done thing. But I'm on record, not just for this game, but for all games, as saying, like, I'm just anti-sideboard as a person usually. I know it's the industry standard, but it's because of mistakes of the past.
Hey, I'm right with you, man. I have always hated sideboards. I hated sideboarding in Magic. I do agree that it's implemented better in Flesh and Blood, but I still don't like it. I just want to build a deck and play that deck, and that's it. The old Star Wars game, no sideboarding. Just saying. Yeah, you don't need sideboarding to have a good game. You just need to... I agree on the balance front, too. Yeah. If it's well balanced, you shouldn't need to be throwing in these extra hate cards for certain matchups. Yeah.
So here's why I think that this game can potentially get away with no sideboards. And the reason why partially Magic needs sideboards is because 40% of the deck is lands. And you can't just fit everything you want into a 60-card deck. And Flesh and Blood, I think it's because there are so many intricate, particular matchups where some of the cards you have don't do anything. So you have to kind of have something. But the way that they do it, again, I think is the right way. The reason why I think that Star Wars Unlimited can get away with not having it is that it's like 50-card decks, I think, is like their standard constructed. I think it's that, yeah. And all 50 of those cards can become lands, can become resources, so you don't need to devote any percentage of your deck just to resource generation. So you have more opportunity to tinker and put things in based on your prognostication of what the meta is going to be like in the tournament that you're entering. That said, do I want sideboards? Yes, I do. Very concise, small, 5 to 7 card sideboards. No more than 10. I think that 10 is even pushing it. Wherein the game is so short and could potentially be so rock, paper, scissors. We don't know yet. But if that's the case, you need sideboards because some of these games are 10 minutes, some of them are 20. And if a round is an hour, you need sideboards to shore up where you're getting dunked on. And sometimes you cannot fit that within your 50-card deck. Keep it concise, 6 to 10 cards. And I think that to me is the right recipe.
Just build a better deck and you won't get dunked on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just accept that in a card game, there's always going to be a good matchup and a bad matchup.
Get good. Darn.
Yeah. Ultimately, just get good. Yeah.
All right. I'll take the next one. It's from Echo Base Gaming, friend of the show. We'll say friend of the show, Echo Base Gaming. What would you say is better for the competitive organized play? A galactic championship that's relatively easy to qualify for, so more people can compete, or should it be hard to qualify for, so only a select group can compete? I am a staunch believer in if you're playing in a world championship, you shouldn't just be able to walk in off the street and potentially win it. And I understand the whole, well, hey, a chip in a chair, you never know, you throw the Hail Mary, and that's the whole scenario. Nuh-uh. I think that national championships should have more or less a easy free roll to get into, and then if you place well there. But in my opinion, world championships are for the players who have essentially established themselves as world-class players, have over time accumulated enough experience or placement of themselves and tournaments, or won a tournament that has granted them permission to get in there or access to the tournament. To me, the World Championship is something like a couple hundred players from all around the world who have qualified through various means. I honestly believe that it shouldn't be exquisitely hard. It shouldn't be like a one per country situation, but I think that it should also be restricted enough where if you want to play and qualify for the World Championships, this is something that you got to be thinking about in like 6 months out. It's like, well, I really want to get into this. What is my path? Like, you have to plan it out. I got to play in this, and if I don't do well here, I could play here and here and here. It is, to me, the pedestal that you're putting the true competitors on.
Yeah, I agree for the most part. I think it's cool to have your bigger tournaments be something that you do have to work to get to and qualify for. And, again, I'll say what I said earlier, where I think at those events, it's important to have side events that feel important as well, that anyone can come off the street and play in. And there's also other things you can do too. I think something that's been kind of underutilized, and again, this goes kind of in the broadcasting side, but I love to see more invitationals in these card games where we have like a tournament of champions and that kind of thing, where it's like a small, maybe 16-person thing that's very well produced so that people can follow along. That kind of thing is very cool and very good at star building. We've seen communities put together that kind of stuff, like a Goliath Gauntlet in Flesh and Blood, I think is a good example of an invitational type thing that's cool. But yeah, I do think at the highest level it should be something that you have to qualify for, that you can't just kind of show up in, especially World Championship. Yeah.
Well, the good news is I asked about this at GenCon because this is very near and dear to me, and it was also on the forefront of my mind because in Flesh and Blood, for example, I did not qualify for Worlds this year, but I'm going to Worlds and I'm going to play in the Calling there, which is essentially a side event. Granted, that's a large scale one, but it's still a side event for Worlds. And so I said, hey, when you're doing these big events, because it's very clear that you are qualifying. They kept mentioning tournament points for their events. So I think that you're going to have a certain number of tournament points in order to qualify. That's my assumption, but I know that they used that term, right? So I was saying, hey, if you're going to be attending these, are you going to have side events? Because part of the fun of like a world championship is the spectacle. And obviously they didn't give me details, but Josh told me we will always make sure that there is something for anybody who wants to participate, for them to do at one of our events. So it's very apparent that they already have side events on their mind. And I think it would be very cool. Flake was kind of talking about, when you should start planning for when you want to qualify. I think that just to give people a reason to even attend something like a Worlds if you didn't qualify, is that whatever those side events are should be like the day one start of qualifying for the next year. So like if you've qualified for Worlds, participating in Worlds also should give you X number of tournament points, I think, for the following year. But then the people that are there for the side events should also, that should be like day one of the next season, if you will, to culminate in the following Worlds. And then you kind of rinse and repeat.
Beauty. And when you talk about tournament points, my mind immediately abbreviated it to TP, and then the first thing that came to mind was Beavis as Cornholio seeking TP.
Oh, no. You got to get your SWU TP.
Yeah. TP for my SWU hole. Yes.
The acronyms are not working in this game. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, well, that's not the thing. All right, I think we got time for one last one, Doa.
Yeah, sure. I actually know this guy, Thomas Brigman. Sorry if I mess up your pronunciation of your last name. I played against this guy in Copenhagen in the Flesh and Blood Outsiders pre-release. Actually,
in Copenhagen.
Yes, I was in Copenhagen doing Rainbow Six, and I went to local stores to play, and he's the offensive coordinator for the Danish American football team. Uniquely, very very interesting. Yeah, very cool.
That is cool.
Great guy. His question is, what would your preferred price support be? I think it means prize support there. I would love to see cool alternate art chase cards like we've seen in other games become kind of the norm. I love that kind of thing. I think like a lot of us are, we're collectors as well as competitors. And so having that exclusive kind of really cool looking chase card to, get from your locals, to, get from like winning a tournament, whether you want to sell that, and that's part of the income related with that. I think that's great. But I also just like having those things and keeping them and collecting them and knowing that I have this unique thing. So yeah, as far as prize support is, I would love to see those really neat, very fancy alternate art cards too. And if I could levy a little bit of criticism towards what I've seen with SWU so far, is that I know there are different artists working on the game, but I don't see enough differentiation between the art styles. Everything seems to be kind of pushed towards this sort of a little bit more comic booky, a little bit more cartoony kind of style. And I would like to see the style of art on these cards expand a little bit more. And obviously I know there's all sorts of licensing thing that goes into this. It's again, very big intellectual property in Star Wars, and I'm sure there's lots of very specific requirements for how these characters and how this universe is portrayed visually. But at the same time, as someone who's got an art degree, I love art, and I'd love to see more of an expansion in what kind of art we see on these cards too. So seeing that in the prize support would be very cool. So there's my long-winded answer to that.
Now, I don't know if Charm3r, if it was your turn in Warhammer 40K that you went back to your table, or you had a loot bag that you came to get for us. But
so I wanted to grab some visual aids for those of us that are watching us on YouTube, but I will also still obviously verbally describe things. I think that alternate art versions of cards is fantastic. That should be just mandatory, and everything that Doa said is great in my opinion. I do think that there is room for more card game companies just in general to kind of expand on the types of things that you can earn or get at events, whether it's for participation or winning. Mm-hmm. So Battle Spirit Saga, for example, they have deck boxes that are specific to certain tiers of winning. So like the one that I'm holding right now, this is something that I forget, it's either top 8 or top 16 at like the big events or whatever, right? They also have mats that you can earn. I have one of those back there. These are not it, but these are the cores you use in Battle Spirits. There are like winners cores where you get like metal ones, and there's like a shiny like silver soul core. So when I think about the cool tokens that we're already getting from GameGenic that are plastic, it'd be really cool if we had some like metal tokens that were specific or special. Like imagine a cool gold shield token. So like I grabbed, these are the Fab Metal tokens. This one was a specific for Pro Tour Baltimore, like exclusive. But just stuff like that, right? I think that there are a lot of ways that you can give cool stuff out that's not just cards that would still make somebody feel, good for participating. Because I'm just like you, Doa. I like having all of that stuff for my own personal collection and nostalgia. And I think that some of those things are great ways to support a game outside of the alternate art stuff. But I think that you have to have that as well. Like you've got to have like that cool chase thing that everybody wants, and you can show off and bling.
Well, Fantasy Flight has already done this in other games. I played the Legend of the Five Rings LCG for, a lot of years before that was ended. And one of the things you could get playing at locals was like cooler versions of the tokens in that game. So I'd be shocked if we didn't have that in Star Wars Unlimited as well. And I do think that's fun too. The chase cards are the coolest thing, but alternate tokens is also, any sort of like way you can bling out your game is always a good thing, I think.
So Thomas just got cash is king ultimately, but that was not an option that we were allowed to choose. So I'm gonna go with immortalization, and here's where I'm going with this. You win a Pro Tour, you win Worlds, you win one of the big ones, and I'm talking not like a calling level thing. I mean like the big one. You get to be immortalized in a card, or you get to design a card or something along those lines. And I know that can be tricky because not everybody who's a great card gamer is not necessarily a good card designer. However, you could work with the design team, give them an idea of what you want. Like, I would love a card that kind of does something like this. And then the team will put something together. Now, whether it could just be something like it becomes an Armory promo or an FNM promo or something like that is not legal in standard or competitive play, but it's given to players that they can play casually, that they can play in if there's like a commander version of this kind of game or commander format where it's or they just take the leader that the dude won with or whoever the person is that won with, and they put them as drawn as the leader character instead and say, hey, congratulations, we're going to get this done for you, we're going to have it printed, and we're going to send it to you. And I think that is something that is a one of one. It is something that is not just going to have financial value, but for the person who wins with that particular hero. If you look at like Pro Tour winners like Matt Folks and Pablo Pintor and Michael Fang, who won the 3 Pro Tours in Flesh and Blood, they get their hero they won with the stamp on it of Pro Tour champion whatever. Those cards are sold for about, I think Pablo Pintor's sold for between 30 and 35,000 USD. Unreal amounts. But again, it's because his face wasn't on it or anything, so it's a little bit more coveted. But if you're talking about a cheap way to give somebody something that whether they have it physically or not, they are immortalized with that particular card. I think that is something that would be super cool. And of course, wrestling belts. Like, wrestling belts are the coolest trophies.
I like the belt. I'm on board.
Go ahead. I was just going to say the other one that I was going to say is a requirement in my mind because I have always wanted to win one in anything. It's got to have an oversized check. Like when you present, I don't care if the prize money is like $100, give me the oversized check.
Yeah, that's fun. I mean, they used to do that at StarCraft tournaments. I casted like 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago now. And so then you'd have the winner like carry it into the casino and like try to cash it and stuff like that. It's fun, but the immortalization, I want to see it done in kind of more of a sportsy kind of way, right? Where like at the next Worlds, right? At the year after, you have a banner with the previous winner on it and like maybe what aspects they played or something like that, and then you just build the banners up hanging in the arena over the years,
yeah.
And something like that. When you get into like card alters with the person or something, then you run into a lot of legal things. So I can tell you where Star Wars is involved. This would never happen.
Imagine
as cool that would
banner.
Be. Go ahead.
Hear me out. Imagine a banner, and it looks like the Galactic Senate. And every time there's a winner, you put somebody in one of the Senate seats.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. I think that's cool. Some Star Warsy kind of way of doing it for sure. Yeah.
So
I do like the exclusive, one of cards that that they do in Flesh and Blood, like Flake mentioned, where it doesn't necessarily have your name on it or anything, but it is a very exclusive kind of thing. But then other ways to immortalize the names of the people. Via banners, or maybe like Magic used to release like tournament winning decks as a thing where it had like an alternate back so you couldn't use it in competitive play, but you could like have that deck and play it and have fun with that. So there are plenty of ways to kind of like do that sort of stuff, but the point is it doesn't matter as much how it's done then that it's done, and it just should be done in some way.
I'm going to use your example, Charm3r, to bookend this episode by saying, so this is how the episode ends, with terrible ideas.
That's a fantastic idea.
Great idea.
They're great ideas. I know. I just have to.
I would give that idea thunderous applause, in fact. Yeah.
For the record, though, that line, for as you know, mediocrely that the prequels may have been written, that line was pretty good. I thought that was some good writing. This is how liberty dies, to thunderous applause. That's a pretty good line. I'm getting no support here.
I just didn't want to give the thunderous applause. I didn't want to feed into it.
Yeah, yep. I wanted you to have the spotlight there.
Thank you. All right. Well, friends, thank you so much
again.
You
are the Senate.
Thank you so much to everybody for tuning in to this episode of Wampa Radio. If you want to contact us, give us some suggestions for topics to discuss, or just hit us with the mailbag, some questions, you can do so by the email, which has been bumping lately at wamparadiopodcast@gmail.com. Twitter @Wampa Radio. You can contact me @WatchFlake. DoA is at @GGDoA. And then there's @that Charm3r. You can also poke and prod us. Yeah, I mean, that's the leet speak from back in the day. Little 1337 action for all of you who probably have gray hair now. Like us. Ultimately, friends, we do appreciate you listening to Wampa Radio. And Charm3r. Charm3r, are you locked? Are you loaded? He is, he says. All right, well, take it away, my friend.
May the force be with you.